Shirts and skins is what they're doing now.
I just totally 100% object to this. And if I was the GM or coach,
Me too.
I would never let one of my players walk out on the floor looking like this. I mean, we are a professional NBA league.
Thomas spitting or tripping saying LeBron's shirtless pregame warm-up was unprofessional.
That's the problem with old heads.
Isiah Thomas just lit up the basketball world again. And the moment he said the GOAT debate has become a complete joke, you could feel the entire NBA conversation pause for a second. Because this wasn't some random hot take from an analyst trying to farm attention online. This was Isiah Thomas, a player who battled through one of the toughest and most physical eras in basketball history, calling out not just LeBron James fans, but the entire culture surrounding the modern GOAT conversation, and whether people agree with him or not. The way he said it carried weight. Here's what really matters though. This didn't come out of nowhere. Thomas didn't suddenly wake up and decide to attack LeBron supporters for no reason. This frustration has clearly been building for years. The non-stop comparisons, the endless debates, the way every single LeBron game somehow becomes evidence, either proving or disproving his legacy. At some point, for older players like Thomas, the conversation stops feeling like basketball analysis and starts feeling like constant noise. That's the deeper issue he seems to be reacting to. The GOAT debate has become so relentless that every achievement, every loss, every interview, and every stat immediately gets turned into ammunition for one side or the other. And for players from previous generations, that obsession can start feeling exhausting instead of meaningful, especially for someone like Isiah Thomas, who came from an era where greatness was measured differently. Back then, players built reputations through championships, rivalries, toughness, and respect inside the league, not through daily social media arguments and non-stop ranking culture. So when he says the debate has become a joke, he's not necessarily saying LeBron isn't great. He's criticizing the environment around the conversation itself. The way fans, media personalities, and internet culture have turned basketball legacy discussions into a non-stop war where every moment gets overanalyzed and weaponized.
Isiah Thomas is 100% right. It's just a bad example to use. Because you see, contrary to what some of you trolls out there want to instigate and fabricate and start up.
Now think about the era Isiah Thomas came from. This is someone who had to battle through legends like Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and Larry Bird just to survive at the top of the league. Back then, greatness wasn't debated through social media arguments every night. It was decided through brutal playoff battles, physical rivalries, and moments where one game could completely shape how your career was remembered forever. So when Isiah looks at today's basketball culture, where debates constantly swing based on highlights, clips, statistics, and narratives that change every week, it probably feels to him like the entire conversation has lost its foundation. And this is where things get complicated, because when a legend says the GOAT debate has become a joke, fans usually don't hear the nuance behind it. They hear disrespect, especially fans of LeBron James. And honestly, that reaction makes sense too. LeBron has one of the most passionate fan bases in sports. People have watched him dominate for more than 2 decades, shatter records, carry franchises, and completely redefine what longevity looks like in professional basketball. So anytime someone criticizes the discussion surrounding him, it instantly feels personal to a lot of supporters. But Isiah's point seemed bigger than simply attacking LeBron himself. He was criticizing the way modern fans and media discuss greatness altogether. Because the GOAT debate today doesn't really operate like a normal basketball discussion anymore. It operates like a non-stop cycle. One huge performance changes the narrative. One bad game changes it again. LeBron scores 40 points, and suddenly people declare the debate over. Then he struggles in a playoff loss, and the conversation immediately swings back toward Jordan. At that point, the debate never truly evolves. It just keeps resetting over and over again, depending on whatever happened most recently.
Professionalism in our NBA league has diminished so much.
Here's the part that rarely gets acknowledged. The GOAT debate has slowly become less about understanding greatness and more about winning arguments online. People choose a side, lock themselves into that position, and then defend it no matter what happens. Context gets ignored. Weaknesses get dismissed. Accomplishments get minimized. And eventually the conversation stops being about basketball entirely and becomes about proving loyalty to one player over another. That's the deeper frustration a lot of former players seem to have with modern sports culture. And honestly, this mindset can affect younger players too. A lot of rising stars grow up hearing constant comparisons before they've even built their own careers. Every talented scorer becomes the next Michael Jordan. Every versatile superstar becomes the next LeBron James. That kind of pressure can be overwhelming because it pushes players to chase somebody else's identity instead of developing their own. But the reality is, true greatness has never come from imitation. It comes from creating something unique. LeBron didn't become LeBron by trying to copy Jordan's exact style. He built his legacy by doing things people had never really seen before, combining elite scoring, playmaking, size, longevity, and versatility in a way that changed expectations for what a superstar could be. And that's probably part of what Isiah Thomas is really pushing back against. The obsession with constantly ranking players against each other can distract people from appreciating what makes each generation different in the first place.
LeBron James is usually dressed up. LeBron James carries the mantle and conducts himself with the proper level of decorum and professionalism. Media interviews, post games, availability, stuff like that. LeBron James shows up. Big events, representing the NBA brand. It's LeBron James you lean on.
Now, let's be clear about one thing. No matter what Isiah Thomas says about the GOAT debate, LeBron James has one of the most undeniable resumes in basketball history. Multiple championships with different franchises. Finals appearances spread across completely different eras of the NBA. Records that may never be touched again. And the ability to evolve his game over time while still performing at an elite level deep into his career. That kind of longevity and adaptability is almost impossible to dismiss. But this is where the tension between generations starts to appear. For players like Isiah Thomas, greatness has never been defined only by statistics or accomplishments on paper. To them, greatness is also about presence, fear, intimidation, the psychological effect a player had the moment they stepped onto the floor. It's about how opponents reacted before the game even started. It's about whether teams believed they could survive a playoff series against you. It's about the aura certain superstars carried during the biggest moments. And that kind of impact is much harder to measure. You can't fully capture fear in a stat sheet. You can't reduce intimidation to a spreadsheet. And you can't always explain presence through highlights alone. That's why these debates become so emotional between different generations of fans and players. Some people value longevity, versatility, and total production. Others value dominance, aura, and the feeling that a player controlled an entire era whenever the stakes were highest. Neither side is looking at greatness the exact same way, which is why the conversation never truly ends.
You know, they showing up the earliest 6 o'clock to a 7:30 game. When LeBron or Kobe came to arena, it's just them.
Yeah, right.
There's no one actually in the gym but you.
I mean, he was really kind of at the height of professionalism going there so early and like...
That's what I'm saying. Like, did you ever go to the gym at 2 o'clock? No, the answer's no.
This is where things start to get tricky, because once you compare eras, you're not even dealing with the same sport in a literal sense anymore. The version of the NBA Isiah Thomas played in is not the same league that LeBron James dominates today. The rules have changed, spacing has changed, pace has changed, and even how defense is played has evolved dramatically. So when fans try to line up careers side by side like they exist in identical conditions, it naturally creates arguments with no clean resolution. And here's something people often forget. Even legends themselves don't agree on a single definition of the GOAT. Some point to Michael Jordan. Some lean toward LeBron. Others bring up entirely different names, depending on what they value most in basketball history. That's because greatness is not a fixed measurement. It's subjective. It depends heavily on what someone prioritizes: championships, longevity, peak dominance, skill set, or overall impact on the game. And that's exactly why this debate never actually ends. But Isiah's frustration isn't really about disagreement. It's about how shallow the conversation can become. Instead of analyzing careers with context and nuance, people often reduce everything to simple win or lose arguments just to prove a point online. That's where younger fans, and even younger players, can misinterpret greatness. They start believing it can be defined by a single stat or a single ranking, when in reality it's a combination of everything: talent, work ethic, longevity, peak performance, leadership, and defining moments under pressure. Even after all that, it still isn't something that produces one final, universal answer.
Look, I like LeBron, I'm a fan of his, so forth and so on. But to walk out on the floor before a game with no shirt on and shoot, I mean, come on, man, where we at?
Now let's bring it back to the fans, because that's really who Isiah Thomas was reacting to in the first place. Supporters of LeBron James are some of the most loyal in all of sports, and that loyalty isn't random. It comes from watching decades of elite production, championship runs, record-breaking milestones, and a level of longevity that very few players in history have ever reached. But sometimes that same loyalty shifts into something more defensive. Not just support, but protection of a narrative. And when someone challenges that narrative, especially a Hall of Famer like Isiah Thomas, it doesn't just spark disagreement. It triggers a stronger emotional reaction. The reality is, debate itself isn't the problem. Sports have always been built on arguments, comparisons, and opinions. That's part of what makes it fun. The issue is how the debate is handled. When conversations turn into constant attempts to discredit one player just to elevate another, the meaning gets lost. Instead of appreciating greatness in different forms, it becomes about winning an argument at all costs. And that's where things get dangerous, because if the GOAT debate keeps heading in that direction, it risks losing its value entirely. What was once a way to celebrate basketball history turns into repetitive noise. Same arguments, same clips, same talking points recycled endlessly. At that point, even the legends people are debating start to disengage, because there's no new understanding being created, just louder versions of the same arguments. And that's probably the core message behind the frustration. Not that fans shouldn't debate, but that the debate should actually respect the complexity of greatness instead of flattening it into a constant battle of sides.
So, to mention the word unprofessionalism and him with a broad brush would be incredibly unfair. But if you're isolating an incident, which Isiah Thomas did, then it's more than fair.
Here's the part nobody is really talking about. Isiah Thomas might actually be doing the GOAT debate a favor by calling it out so directly, because sometimes it takes someone slightly outside the current media cycle to point out how repetitive and reactive the conversation has become, and whether people agree with him or not. His comments force fans to think more carefully about how they talk about greatness in the first place. So what does this mean for LeBron James' legacy? Realistically, nothing changes. LeBron is still one of the greatest players in basketball history. That part isn't really in question. What Isiah is challenging isn't his greatness itself, but the way that greatness gets discussed, ranked, and constantly relitigated in comparison culture. And maybe that's the real takeaway. At some point, you have to step back and ask whether the conversation is actually helping people appreciate greatness, or just turning it into a cycle of arguments where nobody really listens to context anymore. This is where younger fans and even younger players can sometimes misread the goal. They grow up thinking the ultimate achievement is being labeled the GOAT. But in reality, the real goal is building a career where the impact speaks for itself through championships, consistency, longevity, and defining moments that stand on their own without needing constant comparison. The GOAT debate itself, when zoomed out, isn't just about LeBron or Michael Jordan or anyone else. It's really about how fans choose to define and remember greatness across different eras. And if that conversation becomes too shallow or too toxic, it risks overshadowing what actually makes the sport special in the first place. So when Isiah calls the GOAT debate a joke, it doesn't have to be read as disrespect toward LeBron. It can also be read as frustration with how the entire conversation has evolved. But it still leaves a bigger question on the table. Are fans truly recognizing greatness, or just arguing about it endlessly?